This is Gentle Confessions, where truth speaks in a whisper, and healing begins in the quiet Tier 1, the laugh that broke me. I didn't expect to cry that night. I didn't expect anything at all. Really. It was supposed to be one of those harmless evenings, the kind where everyone gathers in a familiar living room. Soft lights overhead. Snacks passed hand to hand, and laughter curling up into the corners of the ceiling like invisible ribbons. I sat in the same spot I always did, the left side of the couch, legs curled under me, warm mug cradled in both hands, like a ritual I didn't remember inventing. I wore the smile I'd perfected over the years, the one that said, "I'm fine. I'm here. I belong." But somewhere in that smile, a crack was already forming. Someone told a joke. I don't even remember what it was. Just that it was loud, unexpected, and absurd, the kind of joke that makes the whole room erupt, uncontrollably, in a wave of unfiltered joy. And I laughed too. Of course I laughed. Except, halfway through, the sound caught in my throat. It snagged on something raw, like laughter had reached down and scraped against something I'd buried, something I didn't know was still there. It started with my breath, a stutter, a hesitation. Then came the tightness, the way my chest forgot how to expand, and my fingers, wrapped around that mug, suddenly felt miles away from my body. I excused myself. Quietly. Politely. I smiled as I stood still playing my role and drifted down the hallway like I was just going to the washroom. But in truth, I collapsed onto the edge of the bathtub, gripping porcelain like it could anchor me to the present. And I cried. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a silent river of everything I hadn't let myself feel. Tears that didn't ask permission. Memories that came without names. Just sensations, the echo of being left. The ache of pretending. The fatigue of always holding it together. And in that moment, something shifted. Not the kind of dramatic shift you see in movies. No background music, no epiphany in glowing neon. Just a quiet, aching realization. I wasn't okay. And maybe I hadn't been. For a very long time. Tier 2. The smile that lied. I sat there, on the cold edge of the bathtub, with my arms wrapped tightly around myself, as if holding my ribs together might keep my heart from falling apart. It's strange, isn't it? How a laugh, something so light, so airy, can break you open. Like a whisper that finds the crack in your armor. I couldn't stop shaking. Not visibly. Maybe. But inside, my whole body was trembling. Like a house after a silent earthquake. The walls still standing, but every floorboard groaning with something unspoken. And all I could think about was that smile. The one I'd worn all night. The one I'd worn for years. You see, I became good at smiling. Too good. Maybe. I knew just how to pull my lips upward, how to let my eyes squint ever so slightly, how to tilt my head just right like I'd read the instructions somewhere and memorized every step. But no one ever told me how heavy that smile would become. No one warned me that holding it for too long like a mask pressed too tightly to your face would make it hard to breathe. I remember when it started. I was maybe 14. My mom had just come back from the hospital. She wasn't sick, exactly, but something in her had changed. She moved slower, spoke less. Her eyes, once so full of fire, now drifted like clouds that had lost their shape. And my dad, well, he didn't know what to do with that. So he didn't do anything. He filled the house with silence, the kind that hums louder than words. I learned in those days that emotions had a time limit. If you cried too long, someone would sigh. If you looked too sad, someone would tell a joke. Or worse, pretend they didn't see. So I adapted. I smiled. I smiled through the dinners where no one asked how I was. I smiled at the teacher when I forgot my homework because I'd been up all night listening to my mom breathe too quietly. I smiled when friends drifted away, confused by how happy I always seemed, but never quite present. I smiled when I didn't get picked, when I lost, when I stumbled, and eventually, that smile became part of me, like skin, like breath, like armor. But tonight, in the middle of that living room, surrounded by people who laughed without fear, that armor cracked. And it wasn't because anyone said something cruel. No. It was the kindness that undid me. The ease. The way they let their guard down and simply were. It reminded me of everything I hadn't let myself feel. Everything I'd pushed down so deep it became part of the foundation. And I realized something then. Something sharp. And sad. And strangely freeing. I wasn't fine. Not even close. And that smile I'd worn so well, it had been lying for far too long. I wiped my face with a towel I didn't recognize. A floral pattern. Light blue. Faded. Like it had been washed too many times. It smelled like lavender, and maybe a little like dust. It made me feel safe. Just for a second. And in that second, I whispered to myself, not out loud, not even in a real voice, but in that voice only we can hear, inside the bones of our quietest moments. It's okay to not be okay. Then I stood. I straightened my shoulders, and I looked at myself in the mirror, not to fix the mascara, not to adjust the smile, but just to look. To see the face I'd been hiding behind for so long. To meet her eyes. Finally. And for once, I didn't try to smile. Tier 3. The room I left without goodbye. The hallway felt longer than I remembered. I stepped out of the bathroom like someone waking from a strange dream, still wrapped in the warmth of lavender-scented silence, but knowing it wouldn't last once I reached the light. The party was still happening. I could hear it through the walls. Laughter echoing in bursts. A record player skipping gently in the corner. Like even it wasn't sure it wanted to keep going. The clink of glasses, the hush of private conversations. And somewhere in that maze of warmth and sound, he was still there. He'd asked me earlier, "Are you okay?" so gently, so simply. And I had smiled. Too quickly. Too well. Of course. I'd said, just a bit tired. But the truth was heavier. And I didn't know how to give it shape. Not without spilling more than I could clean up. So now I stood in the hallway, between the room I'd escaped to, and the one I wasn't sure I could return to. And my feet. They chose neither. They moved toward the front door. I didn't slam it. Didn't flinch. Didn't whisper goodbye. I just slipped out. Like fog drifting past a lamppost briefly illuminated. Then gone. Outside. The air was cooler than I'd expected. Not cold, but that soft kind of chill that makes your skin remember it's real. The street was empty. A cat darted beneath a parked car. A street light flickered, unsure of its own glow, and somewhere in the distance, someone played a piano. Out of tune, out of time, but oddly beautiful. I didn't walk fast. I didn't have anywhere to go, but every step felt like a confession. Step. I'm tired of pretending. Step. I don't know how to be both happy and honest. Step. I miss being held without having to explain why. Step. I'm afraid that I'm disappearing. I passed houses I didn't recognize. Shadows of other lives glowing behind windows. A family watching TV with the volume too loud. A couple dancing slowly in their kitchen. A child asleep in a high chair. Arms folded like wings. And for a moment, I wondered what they'd say if I knocked on their door and simply asked, "Can I sit with you just for a while? Just until my heart finds its rhythm again." But I didn't knock. I kept walking. The sky had that deep indigo hue, the kind that happens right before dawn starts thinking about waking up. And in that quiet, I let myself feel it all. The loneliness, the regret, the strange comfort of finally not trying to be okay. You see, leaving that room wasn't about running away. It wasn't about drama or anger. It was about choosing just once to honor the ache, to give it a name, to let it breathe, to not dress it up in smiles or small talk. And somewhere in that long walk, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit in years. I wanted someone to follow me. Not to fix me. Not to ask questions. Just to be there. To walk beside me in the quiet. To hand me a jacket without a word. To say, with just a glance, "I see you." But no one came. And maybe that was okay. Because for the first time, I wasn't abandoning myself. I was walking with her. The version of me that had been left behind too many times. The one who hid in bathrooms and behind polite laughs. The one who needed a hand but never asked. Tonight, I held her hand, and we walked home. Tier 4. The words I needed, but never heard. There's a strange kind of silence that lives between words that were never said. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It just waits. Like an unfinished sentence hanging in the air. Like a chair that's always empty at the dinner table. Like a voicemail you never had the courage to leave. That night, as I lay in bed still dressed, still unsure, I felt all these unsaid things pile around me like blankets. Heavy, unfolded, unspoken. I kept thinking about his face. The way his eyes looked when he asked me, "Are you okay?" And how mine must have lied in return. There were words I had wanted to say. Simple ones. Soft ones. I'm not fine. I don't know how to be close to people anymore. Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing in plain sight. But instead, I gave him a practiced smile. And now, the silence between us felt permanent, sealed shut by all the things I didn't say. And yet, I couldn't blame him. How could I expect someone to hear what I couldn't voice? In the dim light of my room, I stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows dance. Each one felt like a memory, or a question, or a version of me that still hoped someone might understand. I imagined the words I needed, as if he'd said them. You don't have to be perfect here. You're allowed to fall apart with me. Your sadness doesn't make you too much. Those weren't things he ever said. But I whispered them to myself now like lullabies for the soul. And slowly, something softened inside me. You see, people talk about closure like it's a door you choose to shut. But sometimes, closure is a conversation that never happened. A goodbye that was too quiet. Or the absence of a, "you mattered to me." And in that space, healing has to grow roots in the dark. Without sunlight, without certainty, just hope. So that night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I spoke, out loud, to the empty room, to the quiet version of me that had always been waiting. I wanted someone to see me. I said, I wanted you to see through the smile, and ask again. I needed to hear that it was okay to be a mess, to not know, to cry without apology. And the room, of course, didn't answer. But something shifted, because I heard myself, really heard. And in that fragile honesty, I started to believe I might be worth hearing. I remembered a story he once told me about his mother humming when she was overwhelmed. She never sang real lyrics, just quiet tones. Like her soul needed music, but didn't have the energy for words. I used to think it was weird, he'd said. But now I think it was her way of surviving. That memory came back to me now, like a soft hum inside my chest. And I realized I didn't need perfect words. I just needed presence, gentleness. A reminder that even when no one said what I longed to hear, I could still speak to myself with kindness. That night, I hummed. A soft, tuneless hum. Not to be heard, but to feel something vibrate in the silence. To say in a language older than words, I'm still here. I haven't left myself. Some confessions aren't loud. They're whispered into pillows, mouthed at bathroom mirrors, typed but never sent. And maybe the point isn't to be answered. Maybe the healing begins in the asking, the naming, the soft, sacred act of turning toward yourself and saying, you didn't deserve the silence. You were worthy of words. You still are. Tier 5. The night I held myself together, softly. That night, long after the world had gone quiet. Long after the last car passed outside. And even the hum of the fridge felt like a lullaby. I stayed there, wrapped in sheets that didn't warm me, under a roof that didn't quite feel like shelter. But still I stayed. Because sometimes, The bravest thing we do is simply not leave. I didn't reach for my phone, didn't scroll through old messages, didn't replay the conversations I could never change. Instead, I lay still, letting the silence settle not as an enemy, but as an old friend I hadn't visited in a while. And in that stillness, I began to remember myself, not the version I showed him, not the I'm fine girl, but the version who once cried at sunsets, who wrote letters she never sent, who whispered poems to the moon as if it listened. That version of me had been waiting, patiently, quietly, beneath all the noise. I got up slowly, not to run, not to leave, but to stand in front of the mirror, barefoot and undone. And I looked, really looked, not at the flaws, not at the tired eyes, but at the softness that had survived. I traced the line of my jaw with my fingers, not to criticize, but to say I see you, and I'm sorry I've been gone. I didn't cry that night. Not because I was holding it in, but because, for once, I didn't need to. The storm had passed. What remained was gentle, quiet, like the hush after snowfalls. I sat at the edge of my bed and pulled the blanket around my shoulders, not to hide, but to hold myself, the way I wish someone else had. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel lonely in my own company. I felt kept. Healing didn't arrive like a miracle. There was no breakthrough, no dramatic epiphany, no sudden rush of light. Just a slow exhale, a quiet knowing, a whisper that said, "You're allowed to begin again." And so I did. Not with grand plans, not with certainty, just with breath and softness and the decision to stay present with my own heart. In the morning, the light came slowly, not boldly, but shy like it, too, was unsure if it was welcome. I smiled at that, because I understood. And as I opened the window, let the cool air brush against my skin, I whispered something I'd never said before. Not to him, not to the world, but to myself. I forgive you. For staying quiet, for not being ready, for thinking you had to carry it all alone. And then, like a quiet vow between breaths, I added, "You don't have to do that anymore." That morning, I made tea, not to numb myself, but to offer comfort. I turned on soft music, lit a candle, and sat not with pain, but with peace. That was the gift. Not a perfect ending, but a beginning. One where I chose me. Not because I had to, but because I finally wanted to. So, if you're listening tonight, and there's a silence inside you that feels endless, I want you to know you are not too late. You are not too broken. You are not too much. There is still time for softness, for laughter, for beginning again. And maybe, just maybe, tonight is the night you start. This is your gentle confession, whispered back to you in the quiet, softly, lovingly, and just in time. Good night, love. You made it through.